What would it be like to log into your bank account only to find out that you can no longer access your funds? Your mortgage can't be paid, your utility bills go unpaid as well. Well, this is, of course, what happened to some of the protesters at the Truckers' Freedom Convoy in Ottawa. And one of those truckers is fighting back. Joining us now to chat about this is Chris Fluery. He's a lawyer with the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms Network, and that group is, of course, involved in this case. Chris, good to have you with us.
Thanks for having me.
So can you share some of the backstory of your client, Evan Blackman? What was he arrested for, and what was the evidence against him?
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to clarify one piece from your intro there. Mr. Blackman's not a trucker. He doesn't own a truck. He's not licensed to drive a big rig. The evidence at the trial was that he arrived in Ottawa around February 17th, which was the day before he was arrested. The protest began around January 28th, 29th. So there was no information about what he did during that time period. He's not alleged to have been a leader, an organizer, a donor, someone giving financially to the convoy. He's not alleged to have done any of those things. The only evidence against him pertained to a drone video, a police drone video, which showed about 12 minutes of his interactions with police. He wasn't even visible during much of that time because the drone video moved back and forth. And we know that he was at one point face to face with police when they were, everyone's seen the images of police clearing the streets. There's a lineup of police with riot gear on across the whole length of the street, and protesters were lined up facing off against them. Mr. Blackman was in that context. At some points, he was actually pulling protesters away from police, trying to de-escalate the situation. And for most of the video, he was actually on his knees in front of the police line. What he says was singing "O Canada." The police officer who testified couldn't confirm or deny that, but he was, in any event, he was singing "O Canada" on his knees with his hand to his heart. And shortly after that, the police line moved forward. He was dragged on his belly and arrested at that time. So the trial judge, we actually already had a trial on this matter. That occurred in, and I might get the timeline slightly off, but 2023, approximately summer, early fall of 2023, we had a trial and he was acquitted. The trial judge found that he was not guilty of mischief and obstruct, and of obstructing a police officer. And the Crown appealed. The Crown was successful, and a new trial was ordered. We appealed to the Ontario Court of Appeal, who denied leave, and now the matter is back before the courts in Ottawa for a new trial. And the new trial is actually a week from today.
What were the reasons for the appeal? What did the Crown say?
So the trial judge, unfortunately, was very brief in his reasons. And that is a valid ground of appeal. If the judge doesn't essentially articulate the law or conduct a sufficient analysis of the facts in the law, that is a ground for appeal. And that was their primary ground of appeal.
Okay, so at what point in all of this were his bank accounts frozen, and how did that impact his life?
Right. So he's arrested on February 18th. He is processed at a processing facility outside of Ottawa. It's the similar story for most people who are arrested at that time. He's released the same day after he signs an undertaking, which is a release document. He's taken to the further to the outskirts of the city to a Tim Hortons where he's released. And he immediately figures out that his bank accounts are frozen. He phones TD Bank. They tell him, they confirm that it's frozen, there's nothing he can do, and he's left without access to his funds for approximately a week. He's the owner of his own business, so he wasn't able to pay his employees or essentially conduct business during that period. And quite frankly, it's unimaginable. I can only imagine for myself what I do without, or not do without funds. You can't. You're left with sort of the food in your fridge for that period and basic necessities. And I think the worst part is that there was no indication from the government of Canada when bank accounts would be unfrozen, or if they would be unfrozen, whether he'd ever have access to those funds again.
Was this during the time when the Emergencies Act had been implemented?
Right. So precisely, the Emergencies Act was implemented February 14th. The police action to remove protesters was approximately February 18th and 19th. That's when Mr. Blackman was arrested. And we don't know exactly when his bank account was unfrozen, but I believe the evidence of the RCMP was that most bank accounts were unfrozen by approximately February 23rd.
Now, recently, an Ontario judge ordered the RCMP and TD Bank to produce key records related to how and why Evan Blackman's accounts were frozen. What did you learn from those records?
I don't want to comment too much on it, where it's still before the courts. The records aren't evidence in court. I don't want to comment too much on it. But quite frankly, it's rather scant. There's very little evidence there. And I don't want to say too much more than that at this point.
Yeah. Of course, there was the reaction across the country to the Emergencies Act being used and people's bank accounts being frozen. Legally speaking, can the government do that at any time, or does it have to fall under something like the Emergencies Act? How does this happen, and how concerned should we be about government overreach?
Short answer, very concerned. There's actually been a decision on this from the federal court. It's currently before the Federal Court of Appeal, but Justice Mosley of the federal court was asked to determine, one, whether the Emergencies Act was invoked reasonably, and two, whether or not, even if it was, whether or not it breached the charter rights of, there were two individuals whose bank accounts were also frozen, who are challenging that. Justice Mosley found that the freezing of their bank accounts was a breach of the right to be free from unreasonable search and seizure. It was not saved by Section 1 of the Charter, which means it wasn't a reasonable limit of their rights. And that decision is, as of the moment, still good law. It's an unconstitutional act under all of the circumstances. That doesn't mean that there would never be a circumstance under which the government could freeze someone's bank accounts, but it means that under these circumstances, they certainly couldn't. And it's quite frankly horrifying, to your latter question, that the government could do this, that it was unconstitutional. There was no means of stopping them at the time, and there's no indication that this will never happen again.
So he wins the trial, his first trial, goes to appeal. You're saying there's going to be a second trial. If he wins there, is there any recourse to sue the government or get some kind of financial settlement for the injustice that he's endured?
I haven't had that discussion with Mr. Blackman. Malicious prosecution is a high bar to prove in terms of a civil tort. I haven't had that discussion with Mr. Blackman. I know that he's not a particularly litigious individual. He doesn't like being before the courts, but I don't know any more than that.
So you're saying there will be another trial. Any date yet?
Yes, so the trial is scheduled for next week. It's next Thursday. And then there's going to be a stay application after that. So if he's not acquitted, then if he's acquitted, the freezing of his bank accounts becomes moot. It's a non-issue because he's been acquitted. If he's convicted at the trial, then we go on to argue that the conviction should be stayed because of the serious breach of his charter rights, the freezing of his bank accounts. And that application is scheduled for the next Thursday following the trial.
In light of what's happened to some of the folks who were involved in the Freedom Convoy and some of the court cases we've seen since then, how concerned are you about personal freedoms, and where could we see these kinds of situations going in the future, maybe over the next decade or so? How should we be looking at these kinds of issues?
Right, it's difficult to predict what sort of actions the government is going to take. That's something I've learned. I've been involved in constitutional litigation, not for my whole career, just for the last 3 or so years. And that's one thing I've learned, is that it's extremely difficult to predict what the government is going to do. This government in particular certainly has a record of overreach. A number of major cases have come out involving infringement of provincial rights is a huge one. We should be very concerned about. In terms of a specific prediction of how the government is going to overreach, I'm very reluctant to do that, but I will say it's highly likely that it will continue.
And people are certainly expressing concerns about the so-called Strong Borders Act and the reach of that document. Chris, I appreciate you being with us today. Thanks so much for joining us.
It's no problem, anytime.
Chris Fluery is a lawyer with the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms Network.